Oh, well, that was awkward. Greetings, programs. Let's try this again. Can you hear me now? Apparently my mic was unplugged. Woohoo! Um, but today's been a long day, and I don't have the energy to really kick it in the gear with some Halloween gaming. So, and yes, I can hear you now. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Good to see you, Mr. Guy MM. So, we're gonna do Final Fantasy is down for maintenance. Um, I figured I would do something very Halloween appropriate, and that was I would work on some more of Last Bites because it is supernatural murder mystery involving vampires. And outside of that, um, it would also do something else. We would get a jump start on Nanowrimo because November is the National Novella Writing Month. And it's something I do every year. And so I thought, well, this would be a great combination, right? So I figure I will chat with you guys, write, probably sing. But yeah, so I'm gonna write on Last Bites, very appropriate, and I'll chat with whoever all's here. And currently, yeah, I got Mr. Guy MM. It's always awesome that you are here. Um, yeah, so figured I'd keep to the schedule even though I wasn't feeling the hottest, because that's kind of my OCD. I want that one. Yes. Radioactive. Oh, yep. Ah. Hey, hey, Solus, good to see you. Welcome back. Um, we are doing a Halloween right night. I'm more on sweet last bites, and yeah, caught us just as we're getting kicked off. I figured that would be a nice downwind from my very long day. And besides, this is a story about vampires. How much more and ghouls? Okay, we got the undead right here, so works out for Samhain, for Halloween, however you celebrate. So that's what we're doing tonight. So I'll just be writing and talking, and anybody can grab out some stuff and write with me, and we'll just do it like that. So yeah, it's awesome, awesome, awesome to see you, Solace. Always, always welcome here. Oh, and there might be singing in case my brain does something weird while I'm typing. It does that occasionally. So if I sing terribly, I apologize in advance. Yep. And we're starting off Nanowrimo just a little bit early, at least for me, because I do that every year. That's one of my traditions. So I like the National November Writing Month or National Novella Writing Month. I don't remember right now. That works. I like a bit of. It's perfect for All Hallows Eve or Hallows Day because we're past the Eve. Yes, novel. I always think of it as novella. National Novella Writing Month. I know my brain is weird like that. It when I write in my brain, it's all like fancy flourish script. Baby, you're the best. So yep. So the part I'm at right now is chapter 4, and Nicholas, my current lead character, my I guess my action vehicle. He's he's got inner monologue going, but it's more just like him kind of presenting the sequencing in his mind and what and how he's seeing and how he thinks about it. So it's this one is a little bit um in the sense of what has happened in the chapter before this last one and why he's now watching this situation happen. So I personally I put a lot of serious research into understanding how this particular scene would play out because it's not a nice scene when you're putting things in perspectives for other people to read. You have to make sure that if you're reading it and you're comprehending it, kudos, but somebody else may read it and take something else entirely different away from it. That's kind of the way it goes. So when I'm writing, I try to think of it from like four different people's perspectives. Okay, this and I understand this. Now, as a ghostwriter, I'm gonna come over here to this person's brain space and go, okay, now how do you read this? How do you perceive it? Okay, now how do you read this? How do you perceive it? So sometimes it's you gotta kind of score yourself out and be able to see things from um, kind of a mirroring of angles. So, and that's not something that I think a lot of people think about. So, this gets me rambling. So, what are you guys up to tonight? Because I am curious. It is the 31st in various places. Hey, hey! Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have somebody by the name of, oh my goodness. Welcome, welcome. Come on in, guys. We got plenty of space. We're doing the things. We're writing, we're chatting, and I am working on my murder mystery that has vampires and ghouls. Because it's appropriate for Halloween. So yeah. Oh wow. Well then, happy All Saints Day to you. If you celebrate that. Well, you're talking to the guy who like celebrates um the Lunar New Year. So I celebrate a lot of holidays because they have sentimental value to my family and to their heritages. So I'm blessed that I can be culturally steeped like a tea, like a tea bag in a tea. Wow, my brain. It is a blessing. I definitely think. So we'll say 10, 31, 22. Yeah, cultural teas. That is accurate right there. Be so cold. 10/21 winter solstice. Oh, ironically, I apparently also write on the holidays because one of the times I wrote was on winter solstice. Go me. That's quite an image. Link in a tea bag. That would be. It would have to be done with um Link Between Worlds because he was often there was so much of the picture frames and sliding in and out of the picture frames and being both a picture and being not a picture. So yeah, it would have to be a Link Between Worlds in order to pull off Link in a tea bag plopped on his wall. What flavor would that be? Uh, Real Boost Hero or Hair of the Courage? We'd have to think of a really good name for it. Earl Green. I like that. Dry a dry gray, but it would be Earl Green. Link tea for those who wish to immerse their flavors in palatable substance of dry wit, and it'll stay with you for a long time. Earl Green. Now it's various grocery stores near you. Here, you guys had your whatever thing. I don't know. Oh my goodness, that's exciting! Yay! I have a tea now. I'm gonna get a shirt, and I'm gonna find a way to do a tea furry shirt. Fury, and it's gonna have Link sitting in a teacup with the little steam coming up. That will be smoked out words saying Earl Green. I think that would be so cool. Okay. Okay. I'll buy it when I'm not broke. You know what? I'd buy it when I'm not broke. And nobody's going to want to see my art. I do stick figures. And I'm really good at that. One of those pocket dragons. Oh, yeah. Oh, I think I've seen pictures of Toon Link with him hanging out of the pocket on green shirts that have the drawn on pocket. But yeah. Oh man, we could totally get a Link Digimon. I mean, would that go along the same lines as Kirby? You know, with our traditional hat and the sword and the hot. I mean, that's kind of, you gotta have that. I wonder which kind of Digimon a Link would be. And would we do the Four Swords as Digimon? Or would it just be Green Link himself? Yeah, yeah, the Pocket monsters are very vintage these days. Don't get me wrong. I've been a Pocket Monster fan since they first came out. Man, I loved my games. I still have my games. My perfect red, my wonderful blue. Well, I know that several big name companies sold them sold a lot of the dragon figurines through Hallmark and stuff because they were a big thing. I have some of those. I have one that I use as my Akari from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and it's all curled up, so you can't see it has if it has legs or anything because Akaris don't. And so it's all like this. So when I took a picture of myself holding it like this, so you only saw it as the Akari. It was awesome. Made my day. I don't get out much. But then again, I have a mandrake for a pet plant, so maybe I really don't get out much. I mean, I consider myself to be a Hufflepuff. Jared's a Ravenclaw. Jared's always been a Ravenclaw, though. I mean, it makes sense, right? Yeah. There are other houses. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw are other houses. It's not all about Slytherin and Gryffindor, guys. You know, it's other schools too. Just saying. I'm okay now. Wow. I gotta read over this really quick. Oh. Yeah, see, I want to read this out loud, but I'm worried that what I have here might be a little intense. They had the little crystal balls. Yep. Uh, is Halloween. Okay, so who wants me to read this little thing I put out? Yeah, totally House Ravenpuff. It's best house ever. Yeah, they had the pretty little round crystals. Every dragon had their own. I'm trying to remember who made them. Okay, okay, cool. All right, then I will read chapter 4. You know what? Kind of feeling spicy enough to read more than it. But understand that if I read more of this, there's a high amount of there's graphic stuff. Um, let's do this. Okay. Okay. I do, yeah. I know, but I have to remember to keep. Okay. So I will give a warning in advance. There is, if I go to read this up to the first part of chapter 4 I've got, because it is a Halloween. It's definitely Halloween themed. There's darkness in this. It talks about uh people hitting other people. It talks about bugs tearing into people, and it talks about a lot of aggressive fighting. And people are thrown in jail, and there's sentimental arguments, and then there is pretty much a bone and ash collector. So if you guys don't mind hearing about those sort of things, then I will comfortably read it to you. Yeah, that ain't there's nothing like that in this. Sorry, none of that. This is this is a story for someone. It is not a story about romance. Nope. We're festively traditionally we're honoring the holiday. So yeah, no romance today. So if you guys are cool with a little bit of gore and a lot of violence and death, then we're good for it. Yep, and I'm doing my best to keep it PG. That's why I might verbally edit some of these things so they're not as graphically inclined. So yeah, but considering half the stuff I saw Owl watching, yeah, okay. Where was I at? Oh yeah, okay. Well, I guess we'll start at the beginning. Because that's where all good beginnings, all good stories start, right? Back to the beginning. Okay, go get your food, and then once you get your food, I will start. So, I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory. Um, so this is Last Bites. It's the second book in the Sweet Tooth series, and the Sweet Tooth series is about a catering company that is run by a vampire, a fey vampire. So he's half vampire, half fey. We don't know what's in the middle. Named Alistair Claremont, and he co-owns a catering company called Sweet Tooth with his longtime friend, and I think keeper in some ways, who is a raven shapeshifter who's also fey, and his name is Eric Faraday. And so the last book we were in New Orleans, and the boys were there, and Alistair can't keep his nose out of food or the company of women or murder. So when there's a supernatural murder, Alistair has to jump right in on it, and Eric is there grabbing Alistair by the back of his coattails and reining him in. Because that's how it goes. So you have, so when I first started this series, I was wanting to do something that was completely new to me. And I started it going, okay, well, I'm gonna write something I've never done before. And I love murder mysteries. And I like foodie murder mysteries. I also like murder mysteries that have cats to do the investigation as well. Not like I like the Animorphs, but like as in the investigator has cats and the cats in their doing of things kind of uncover different clues to help the investigator out. That sort of thing. So I'd never read a supernatural foodie murder mystery. And I thought, what the heck? I'll give it a try. And that's how Sweet Tooth came into being. And I wanted to make it into a series. So I got very excited about it, and I started writing it. I had it set. I even have it's who the nemesis are. I've got everything in there. It's still in progress. And as I was writing it, I got contacted by a friend who needed a little snippet for something she was doing for a newspaper thing she was publishing. She goes, "Can you write me up something, a little blurb on something that involves, it wasn't food, but it was supposed to be a little bit comedic, but it was also supposed to be just, fantasy." And so I'm writing, I was still doing stuff on Sweet Tooth, and I thought, oh my goodness, Alistair needs a little black book, because that's right up his alley. But it would be a little black book of recipes, not a little black book of all the women that he's attempted to date and not succeeded in. Been turned down horribly, because that's kind of how it happens with Alistair. He's a terrible flirt. He can't help himself. It's the face side. So I start writing this up, and as I'm writing it, it starts taking full form and becomes like a full-on chapter. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just wrote the first chapter of the next book in the Sweet Tooth series. And I was like, oh, that is not supposed to happen. I have to finish up one book before I can start the other. No, that's not how it goes, writer friends. Sorry, that's not how it goes. By the way, welcome back, Mr. Guy MM. You have taters. Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew. Boil 'em, mash 'em, boil 'em, mash 'em. Potatoes. Yes. Precious. But yeah, so I'm sitting there going, great. Now I have one book that's halfway through being written. Now its sequel is in the works. Am I a bad writer? No. You could have a whole bunch of books in the works and not be a bad writer. It just means that your brain said, this idea is great, and I really want to fully form it into this area over here. So that's what kicked off the second book in the series, which is Last Bites, which started out with it being Alistair's little black book, ... of recipes. So yeah. So now that Mr. Guy MM is back, I'm hoping everybody's got their red and their cocoa and whatever else they're planning to sip and savor as I read something, and hope no one gets traumatized. Greetings, programs. I see we got more people out there. Come on in. Tonight we are just enjoying a little bit of me reading one of my more dark stories to the folks out here in the community, happily just chilling and chatting with me, and we're all having a good time. So welcome. Feel free to hop in the chat and say hello, or you can just lurk. Lurking is totally cool. So, if you guys are ready, let me know. And then I'll start to read. And yeah, I'm a bit nervous. It's been a long time since I've actually read any of my stuff. Thank you. You were kind. Thank you, Solus. I heart and tater tot you because that's or maybe they're more like this. Like I tater tot you. Yeah, yeah. I squared it out. That's what I did. I'm a dork. We know this. So, all right. So I like having prologues because that kind of allows me to get my brain in gear for what I'm writing. And the prologue is actually what was blurped originally in the thing I wrote for my friend who was publishing stuff. So yeah, I love that. My prologue made me happy. Okay, book two, Last Bites. Book two in the Sweet Tooth series. This book is Last Bites. Prologue, Arrested Development. Oh, that's just icing on the cake. Alistair made good use of the phone call to argue why his choice that led him to his current, I would say situation, but I think I forgot to put that in there. His current situation, as he adamantly put it, oh, okay. There's my brain. See, this is why you're supposed to read through, and I did, and it's been a while. Let me try that again. Do that. Alistair made good use of the phone call to argue out why his choice that led him to his current and, as he adamantly put it, temporary stay in jail was strictly a benefit to them both. Eric, on the other hand, was not amused and very, very tired as he accepted the collect call from Surrey in the wee hours of the morning. After a few minutes of listening to Alistair go on, Eric told him he could sod off, and then hung up and went back to bed. About a half an hour later, it dawned on him, what if Alistair, 1, had actually called from jail, and 2, called from Surrey? That he had done something so rash as he was no longer in the States, unless there was a place in the States called Surrey, which Eric was pretty sure there wasn't. Shaking his head, the Raven Shifter pulled his lanky body out of the futon, and then folded up his bedding, put it away for what normally would be the start of the day, but given troubles perchance for Alistair, this would end up being a duration he knew not. Stretching, he let his mind concoct his next course of action, and stood and went over to his rotary phone. He only used the cell when the catering company traveled, and preferred the now rarely used home phone, complete with the lovely noise it made every time he would release the hole his finger was in, and the phone part that showed the numbers would chunk, 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 chunk back into place. It was a soothing noise, and actually made him smile. He looked at his watch. 1 a.m.? 1 flipping a.m. in the morning? What was wrong with him that he'd get arrested in the a.m.s? Then it dawned on him he didn't know which Surrey Alistair had went and gotten himself in trouble in. And was it from Fey antics or something much darker? Knowing Alistair as he did, it was guaranteed it was more than likely a whole lot darker, because Alistair, being Alistair, didn't know when to leave well enough alone. A dark look slipped over Eric's face as his head lifted with a very a dark look slipped over Eric's face as his head filled with a very off chance that his bright but often clueless and overly exuberant friend might have been in the wrong place at the right time. Of course, that could mean a liaison that had went wrong with a lady friend, or worse, murder. He let out a long sigh and hoped the Surrey jail Alistair was now stuck in was Canada and not England. If it was murder, then it would be up to Eric to get Alistair's sparkly bum clear of the charges. Though, maybe, just maybe, to being so tired, he was jumping the gun on this. He hoped he most certainly was. And then again, this was Alistair, and murder and Alistair kind of ended up in the same place more often than Eric wanted to admit. But that was because, in a way, Alistair could smell it, or smell things near it. He blamed the vampire side of Alistair's genetics because, as a Fae, he knew Fae didn't have that special capability. He couldn't smell any such thing, and frankly it would put him off his culinary arts if he could. He was quite certain of such. The more he the more he attempted to not be upset and rationalize it all out, the more upset and frustrated over this he became. We still good? Do you want me to keep going? I'm worried I'm boring you guys. Yes, this is nervous. I'm nervous. Keep going? Okay. Waking up fully, Eric set to tracking down the number that Alistair had used to call from. The area code was 604, which meant good old Alistair had gotten himself locked up in Surrey, Canada, not Surrey, England. That in some ways was a good thing and some ways a bad thing. Being Fae meant traveling was efficient and quick, so distance was not always a worry. But the why lingered, and the why was the unknown factor that usually truly defined Alistair's current situation, or situations. Letting out a long sigh, he had no clue what to expect, but at least an idea of where to start. Calmly, he called back the number, which of course was only an outgoing number, but not an ingoing one, so he looked up the stations in Surrey, only to discover his work would be cut out for him. Taking a breath, he then proceeded to call 11 different ones, just trying to track down the ever-frustrating vampire. He called not just business partner, but also friend. However, right now, friendship was not high on his list of feelings for Alistair. Luck would not have it, however, the Mounties that were working in the wee hours of the morning shift had gotten rather frustrated at one of the incarcerated folks who kept calling them, wow, my brain, thanks. Oh, yes, who kept calling them bobbies, insisting he get some tea. One of the other officers had gotten frustrated by it and whispered it to the one who answered the call, who then had been transferred, so Eric heard it in the background as he talked to the man on where he assumed was the front desk answering the phones. Getting the address, he said he would come and he would see what he could do to clear his business associate's name. He also passed on information about the catering company and Alistair's own full name and credentials, and then gave his own and let them know he would be there within the hour. After a flurry more of phone calls, he arranged for the transportation via the FSTS, Ferry Security Transitional Service, for both himself and his old preferred beater car, then headed out the door and to the closest ferry mound to get to the station within the time he'd offered. Eric Faraday was a being that prided himself on being places in a prompt and timely fashion. Being tired offered no excuse, nor would he have used it as such if he had been given the opportunity. Arriving at the mound, he showed the FSTS officers his state's driver's license, then the other kin ID, and then showed them the identifying marks of the kind of supernatural Fae being he was. Once that had all been reviewed and cleared, he was then escorted by the female Huldra officer and was teleported to an area on the outskirts of Surrey, Canada. The car came through a large portal near him, and he hurried, yet seemingly relaxed, to climb into the car and made his way to the address for the station he had been given over the phone. Sighing, he finally found the station and parked near it, and made a point of grabbing all of Alistair's documents, proving who he was, and headed inside the station. It wasn't a spacious place, but it was clean, and he found his way to the reception desk and told the man there who he was. Within a few minutes, several of the mounted police sauntered in, and that's when Eric realized he might have made a mistake. But he wasn't sure what he'd done wrong. An officer approached him and informed him he was under arrest for evasion of arrest and accomplice to a murder. He inhaled and became quiet, and then let himself be led through the doors and into a cell further down the hall in the back. This was the first time he had ever been arrested for anything, but not a first for his friend. He and Alice there had a lot to talk about, and he needed to get to the bottom of this fast, and more so, this was turning out to be a very, very, very long night. He would wait for the allotted phone call and use it to the best of his ability as a single name popped into his head, and whose territory they were in. Itenar Budhi, or in the supernatural circles, if a human was lucky enough to cross paths with him, a man of rebirth. And then the prologue, guys. Are you ready for chapter 1? I'm so nervous right now. I know we're on Halloween day, but I am nervous that you guys are gonna be like, oh, this sucks, or be like, oh, well, we've heard worse. Okay, I've got it. I'm ready. Okay, all right. Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so go ahead and continue. That's a yes. Okay. Okay. Chapter 1 of Bones and Ash. And another thing you can see up here is I really like to get as close to 5,000 words as possible. I feel like a chapter is more fleshed out if it has almost as close to 500 words as possible, or 5,000 words. 500 words, this much. 5,000 words, yeah, doing good. Okay. Across town, another man was taking the time to collect the remains of a spine and the rib cage backbone of a vampire that was now deceased. He knew it was a vampire because the sulfur was a unique one. Amongst the ones that were laid to rest, the supernatural, it was known that if you scratched the bones, the sulfuric scent would drift up and cloy in one's nostrils. This was one of the many that seemed to be dropping like flies around the Coven's territory, and just beyond it. As one of the humans in service to the Coven, this particular job fell to him. Nicholas wasn't a fan of this duty, but it was how he served. And the remains of the vampires had to be so carefully handled. If other humans, if you could really call them that, most were like him, ghouls having exchanged blood with a vampire of the Coven that had picked them. You just didn't walk in and say, hey, I want to be a bondservant. Wow, my brain is all over the place. You just didn't walk in and say, hey, I want to be a bondservant to a vampire. Anyone here needing someone? In this Coven, that was the quickest way to get killed, or killed in the worst ways possible. A shudder ran through him as he thought back on a few of the more creative ways sightseers and adrenaline enthusiasts had met their untimely end, and then later ended up on the sides of the milk cartons. Though that was fading these days, due to how crazy the world had become, not that it wasn't crazy when he'd first been turned. At the time, it wasn't something he would have ever sought out. He wasn't a thrill seeker. Nice and quiet he was. He liked working and being efficient in his tasks. A rat catcher, they considered him at the time. It wasn't the nicest work, but it was still work. And it meant food was always plentiful, and at that time, till the disease they would later call smallpox struck, and so many died. Maybe that's why at times he still twitched and became a bit nervous around coughing people. Not that illness had the same effect on his body these days. and it had thankfully been 100 years plus. But these things were still not the best. Then again, nothing ever was. Thinking back on his current job, he preferred it to the rat catching one he'd had all those years ago. Though still it was a job that needed a skilled hand and, of course, discretion. Still, okay, that's a private note to me. This was not the first of the remains he'd been finding, and he was most certain that it would not be the last. After collecting this set carefully, he placed them in a box and wrapped them up to go back to his vehicle. And then he took them to the house of the coven member the bones belonged to. The bones belonged to her ghouls and blood dolls would need to know of her passing. This was part of the job he hated. He had nothing to do more than deliver the box, offer up his condolences because sadly he had no answers. As he drove down the very suburban area, he parked in the driveway of a very whitewashed house, complete with a white picket fence and a swing set outside. The eye tick came back when he would have to deal with humans, which he didn't do well. Parking in the driveway, he finished wrapping the box and handling it with the utmost care as he climbed out of the car. Tucking the box under one arm, he opened up the fence and then closed it carefully after himself and walked up the cemented walkway. Trying to calm the eye tick, he knocked twice, waited, knocked twice more, then waited, then knocked twice more. That way those inside would know he was with the coven and on business of importance. A few moments passed, and maybe they thought he couldn't smell them, but it was one of the things he had picked up over the years of service. And supernatural or not, people have very unique smells, and sometimes the beings around him had no clue how much they smelled, and not in a good way. The door finally opened a crack, and a little girl answered. He knew this was not a little girl, but someone who was a little in the household, and this was acceptable dress. The vampire whose remains he currently carried was fond of Lolitas, and allowed her staff and family to dress in such ways. This is probably her current favorite, and she smelled of blood, but not her own, or the vampires in this box for the house, in his box for the household. Sighing heavily, the eye tick moved to the other eye and down the corner of his mouth, as he knew this would not bode well. If there was another vampire under the roof without the coven's knowledge, it meant the now deceased vampire in his hands had been creating when that was strictly forbidden. His head hurt, and he spoke and requested entrance on behalf of the coven, only to see the girl's eyes widen, and then she squeaked and said she would have to go get him, and then ran from the door, but didn't close it completely. As he had not been officially invited in, he could still feel a bit of the barrier that would normally keep out other vampires, or anyone not of this vampire's household out. However, he was carrying her remains, and did not wish to be kept waiting longer than was absolutely necessary, as he still had many more things to do today, and this again had not been in his top 5 things to do today. He was soon greeted by screaming, a great deal of squabbling, and things breaking. Then was quiet, and he assumed the strongest member of the family had prevailed, and was not really surprised when the little one came to the door once more. Whispering and glancing over her shoulder over to whomever was just on the other side of the door, she asked, "What business have you with our mistress here in her home?" The pause, as she swallowed and then flinched, was obvious, as the scent of fear was now overwhelming him. It was literally one of his least favorite scents, and now both of his eyes had ticks in the corners, and the muscles of his cheeks were spasming uncontrollably. Gritting his teeth, he smiled, which made him look rather crazy, and spoke in the same tones as he had when asking for entrance, and repeating himself louder this time to ensure whoever was behind the door heard him. "I am Nicholas Dronin. I serve the Surrey Coven, and I request entrance to the home of the vampire Ariana. There's much I need to discuss on behalf of the coven and for her home. Please know I will not ask again. In fact, next time I will invoke rights of entrance and no one will be able to stop me. The coven's time, as I am sure you will agree, is very important, and as you know, they only sent out representatives when it is the utmost importance of things. She stepped away from the door, and there was more scuffling, and something that sounded like it had been crunched with a resounding, almost sickening squelching sound, and now a bloodied hand opened the door, and a deeper voice resounded with, "You may enter. We are sorry you were detained. We wish only for the best for a representative of the coven. Please follow the one who first greeted you to our mistress's sitting room. I will be with you in a minute." Nicholas nodded and followed, but soon as he entered the house, there was the smells of far more than just fear that met him. He did not let it be known in his body language that he was taking in everything around him. The twitches had become more obvious, and he let them so he could focus on everything, and knew they would only see the ticks. As always, it helped keep people from getting close as he did what he needed to do. Following the footsteps, he could taste and smell the damage. Following her footsteps, he could taste and smell the damage to her body. He could also tell she was recently turned ghoul, and not by the vampire he was still keeping close. In that moment, he knew handing her over would probably mean he would not leave this place without a fight, and then that would be far more paperwork he'd have to explain to the coven and fill out, and his day was already too long as it was. This place was also bigger than it looked from the outside, and he knew there was more than just good architecture that had been done here. "You still good?" "Just checking." Yes, I'm nervous, so occasionally I will ask, "Are we still good?" You guys can even thumbs up if you wanna. Okay, we still good? Okay. Yes, I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. Yay! Okay. Where was I? Come in and get in here. As they went upstairs to the sitting room, thank you. I will be nervous. As they went upstairs to the sitting room, he felt the box grow warm, and the scent of sulfur tingled in his nose. Another reason he'd carefully wrapped the remains and bound them was because this was like a beacon when you entered the home of the vampire the bones belonged to. Anything that has been saturated with their energies would call to them, and though they could not be revived, it was still unnerving nonetheless, and honestly not the first or the last of all the weird and unusual things he had seen in his 132 years of life. But it was the new ones that flipped out or broke when exposed or not properly eased into the life that would be their permanent one. He was led into the room, but the little one herself did not step in. She shyly mumbled, "Don't want to get my dirty blood on Mistress Aries' carpet. It would make her so sad," and then raced away and left him standing there inside the doorway of the sitting room. As he'd been allowed to the sitting room, he glanced around and looked at the things that were obviously sentimental value to she who had been the head of this place. Her sitting room was immaculate and told so much about her troubles and the things she adored, from little Auguste mimes in simplistic French art styles to china dolls dressed in elaborate Victorian attire. Some he was even familiar with, as he'd been living during the industrial period and made some of his not-so-best ideas during that time. Finally, he stood beside the desk, as he had not been directed to sit, and knew he would not. The owner was very, very much in his carefully wrapped box. Patiently he stood for an hour, serenaded by yelling, and a lot more breaking of things, and a lot more squelching noises, till finally he was graced by the presence of the one who was setting himself as head, or at least saw himself as a second in command. who walked around like a swan or a peacock reeking of blood and violence. There really was nothing so bitter than the scent of violence when it was a combination of the fear of the being hurt and the being hurting them, and the adrenaline of doing such as they deemed a lesser being, who deserved such. This made his facial tics increase, and as he bowed and then waited to be told to sit. Upon sitting, the man informed him that his beloved mistress was not home, and he had no clue when she would return. Nicholas nodded and then spoke, voice steady, his face a twisted thing of tics, as he turned and looked at the man. Ah, that is a disappointment, as the Cubbon was wondering if she was siring heirs, or if she was. And if she was, it was important that the Cubbon got to interview and see if they were worthy of the gift she would offer her children. Then he looked at the man dead in the eye, with the look of one immortal to another, and stated, "The Cubbon would like you to make yourself available to see them immediately on behalf of your mistress. Do you think you can make such prompt arrangements? Because if you do not, they will not see it as a kindness, and you, as well as I, know the punishment for failing to attend a summons from the Cubbon." Standing, he stated, "I believe the Cubbon's business here, in this home, is concluded. Make your way promptly to see them, and do tell them Nicholas sent you, won't you?" The man stared in shock, and all pompous attitude dropped. He then almost yelled as he watched Nicholas walk out of the sitting room. "But wait! What's in your box? Is that not for my mistress?" Turning back, Nicholas gave the man a very dark and twisted smile, as he was tired of his smell and his attitude. "This pertains to Mistress Ariana, not you. In fact, I feel it would be in this household's best interest if you sent over all the staff, that includes pets, blood dolls, collected humans, and ghouls that are in this house's service, and in your service, and in your mistress's service, to the council, or to the Cubbon, and you will do so with a dependent on your life haste, or I will reveal your unauthorized life to the Cubbon, and then ashes and ashes and dust to dust." And with that, he strode from the house, leaving in his wake more than just the feeling of discomfort. But this time, knew the scent of fear was the man scrambling to cover up a lot. As he walked down the stairs, he followed the scent and found the little one crumpled in a corner. Picking her up, he carried her as well. Standing inside the door, he held the box out with his other hand and invoked a spell. "I lay claim to all within my rights as a collector and a guardian of the old ways, till that who shall reside can be picked up and do as they must." As the door sparked from the inside, it opened and let him and the little one out of the house. He covered her up in a dark sheet when they got in the car, knowing she was now in shock, and with no vampire to help heal her wounds, she would die a horrible death. He could smell her fear, and whispered that he would be okay now. He would make it all right. Then he got into the front seat and drove like a bat out of hell, as much as he could without driving so insanely the Mounties would come for him. He was so far away from his routine schedule by now, it was like flying by the seat of his pants, which he hated. Okay, and now we're at chapter 2. Okay, I'm not going to ask again because I just asked in the middle of the other chapter, so I'll just keep going. Death Becomes Her. Chapter 2, Death Becomes Her. By the way, that is a movie I absolutely love. Parking at one of the Coven safe houses, he pulled her out of the car. Getting to the door, he held his hand up to the door, invoking the seal on it and letting himself in. Laying her down carefully, he went to the kitchen, opened the box, scraped some of the bone into a mortar, and then using the pestle, he ground it into a fine powder, and went in the living room, returned to the living room, and began to clean her up, and put pressure. As he cleaned her up, he put pressure on the wounds that were bleeding as he took her blood and combined it with the powdered bones of her dame. This was something that was last resort only, and would only work if there was something still left of the vampire. It was something he himself had experienced. Luckily for this one, her mistress had died within the last 24 hours, so the remains were at least fresh. Combining her blood and the remains of her mistress, he added a little water and then brought it out to her. The ticks, of course, were back, and he nervously sat her up and then poured the concoction down her throat, rubbing it to help her swallow the mixture. This was really not his day, and now this had to be done. Laying her back down, he hoped that this would take, because it was literally the last chance she would have to feed from her mistress. It took a couple of hours, but soon his ears were filled with hysterical sobbing, meaning she had recovered enough, he hoped, to talk, and to realize she was not in her home. Closing up the box and rewrapping it, he walked back into the living room and spoke calmly to her, which only set her into more hysteria. The fear was giving him a serious headache, and he simply said, "Are you hungry? I would like you to come with me and get something to eat." It was not quite a command, and he had invoked his rights to the mistress's things and people which she did not know, but it was one of the perks that allowed that it was one of the perks of being a really old ghoul. But she felt the bidding nonetheless, and stood almost calmly and followed him into the kitchen, to which he asked her what her favorite food was, and she said she didn't know, so he made her a simple sandwich of turkey and cheddar cheese, toasted it, cut it into fours, and then gave it to her with an accompanying glass of water. Watching her eat heartily between sobs, he slowly pulled her years of servitude, which was actually longer than he'd expected out of her, as was longer than he had expected out of her. She'd been a fresh one, brought in as a blood doll, and the mistress had taken to her almost right away. So she didn't stay a blood doll, but became an ongoing staff, which after a while, the mistress had taken her permanently into her service. So it'd been nice, though. The part she didn't like was how upset she got over the blood dolls. She knew it was always temporary for them, but it was like they were the flavor of the week, and by all technicality, she was not wrong. It was a lot to listen to, and he knew she was reliving a lot as she shared it with him. He didn't have the heart to tell her her mistress was dead, which is why the memories were so vivid. For a ghoul to recently lose a master, they were trapped in memories, and would have to be worked through them. He could now see why the newly minted vampire had found her so equal an opportunity to try his new powers out on her. She was a bit naive, but that was part of her appeal, so she'd given herself over it, and it cemented her place in the household staff. So at first her life as a ghoul had been unsettling, and had only known what it was to be a human or a blood doll. Those jobs were easy in comparison to being a ghoul, and all the responsibilities that came with it. But the mistress loved her so much, and had told her she always wanted to keep her close. Mistress Ariana, in general, was a most loving and generous to her personal staff, and Elizabeth, as he now was discovering her name, and actually surprised she had been allowed to keep hers, as they shortened it to Beth, for high protocol meals and events, she was called by her full name, which her mistress found adorable. The new guy had come to them recently, having sworn he needed protection, but wouldn't say from whom. Then after he seemed to get on well with the mistress. Mistress was suddenly called away, and he was placed in charge. It didn't feel right amongst the staff, but none could argue, or he would be angry, and began making examples of their older ghouls in the mistress's services. Examples, she said, was putting it lightly. He straight up enjoyed ripping them apart one piece at a time, and seemed to feed off their fear, and feeding him off him made her and the older ones sick, so they began refusing, which encouraged him to torment and break them more. It was one of those training times Nicholas had ventured upon. It also explained the smell of blood on her that wasn't hers, and the way she was being treated. He was hurting them, not only as a show of power and control, but as just to be destructive, and that was one of the reasons why new possibles were interviewed and tested by the councils. It was monsters like these that given vampires bad names over the years. And a lot of nonsense books had not helped with that either. But he did not begrudge the storyteller, as they often told stories that sparked their minds the most. It was moments like these when a song about darkness being a friend would echo in his head. Shaking his head, he set about cleaning up and noticed she'd paused in her voracious eating to ask for more and calmly thank him for his efforts on her behalf. Though she still felt he was a bit creepy, especially when he looked at her, and asked which master had taught him the neat thing he did when he contorted his face, to which he sighed and explained it was something he'd crossed over with one of the few things the gift didn't heal, or make less, or even take away. To which she said, "Oh," and left it at that, and then looked at the insides of her hands and pulled up her sleeves to show him a skin defect that had been with her for a long time. The older ghouls had things defining them, imperfections, hidden from master and mistress's sights, to not incur wrath, or not incur ire or worse being experimented on. So to show it to another was both an honor and a sense of going out on a limb of trust. He knew this as she did, but he had already rescued her, though she wouldn't have willingly left her mistress's household, even with the new head doing all he was doing to staff. It was a forced extraction. They both knew it. Now she was calmer. Curiosity had gotten the better of her, so she asked what was in the box as it called to her, and he shook his head in a negative fashion, and he told her he was not at liberty to share, and their next stop would be the Surrey Council, and if the rest of her household was lucky, they would be there too. Her eyes widened, because those summoned to the council didn't always return. Now this had never happened in her time of service to the Mistress Airy, but it could now that her mistress had not come back yet. And yet she got excited, because maybe her mistress was there, and she would get to see her again. And then they could all go home. And the man would leave, and not come back. He watched her quietly think on things, and left her to go get more food, prepped one more batch of the special blood blend, and then bringing it back out, handed it to her, and the new plate of food. Bringing it back out, handed her both the new plate of food and the new drink. She looked at it a bit wary, and he said in a very steady voice, ticks at a minimum, that it would keep her strong and calm, so she could still serve her mistress's house. Her mistress's house at her best, and that made her smile brightly as she drank it and drove into the second batch of sandwiches. There was a bit of sadness in his eyes as he watched her, knowing the council would have to choose another master or mistress for her, lest she go rogue and degenerated, and ghouls in that state had to be destroyed. It was a kindness to them. Understanding this knowledge was almost what made the job easier at times when that had to be done. In a sense, he was glad he'd never been given that duty, because the ghouls that had kept it far more to themselves than he did, the ghouls who had that job kept far more to themselves than he normally did. It was said that there was a darkness that haunted their eyes, the kind of intense look that meant you had seen more and done more things than you could ever tell another, living or dead, soul. Nicholas did what every long-term goal in the service of the coven did: observe, ask no questions, and do not stand out like a sore thumb. Simply enough, yet not would be the one unspoken rule for this young newly without a mistress, protection, and more. No, she would either settle in, or sadly she would go rogue. There was nothing that could be done unless she herself could find a purpose to belong once more. That really was the heart and soul of the ghoul purpose, the service to the master or mistress. In this case, the coven, as his master had died long ago. He, however, was one of the lucky ones. Another ghoul had found him, given him a purpose, and helped him fight against the degeneration, and then they just met. As ghouls were not vampires, it was very much a half-life caught between the sun and the moon, the long-lived time, but were not truly undead. Nicholas hated it, but was grateful at the same time for being able to live. Turning away, he stepped back into the kitchen and rang up the Surrey Council contact, letting them know of the current situation, and then waited on the phone until they could give him a time to bring in the rescue. He simply asked to be able to accompany her at this point, as he had been forced to invoke the rights of claim over the household and still carried the package. This information was passed on to those who needed to know, and it was given the go-ahead. Hanging up the phone, he took a moment to tidy up the kitchen and moved back to the dining area and to the couch, and quietly informed her that they would need to go, so she should take a moment to relieve herself and freshen up before they headed to meet with the council. Okay. This is where it's going to start to really get gritty, guys. So I'm giving you the heads up right now. Also, welcome! Greetings, programs! Tonight we're reading, I'm reading a appropriate story for Halloween, Samhain, however you celebrate it. And it's one of the stories I'm writing called Last Bites. So come on in. If you want to say something in local chat, please do. I will happily talk to you. If not, I'll continue reading. But welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. Okay, so if you guys are okay, we're about to get to the darker stuff. And this is where it gets really, really, really dark. And very, very violent in some ways. And very disturbing. So, okay, here we go. The sound of a window breaking in the bathroom told him that there would be no time for her to freshen up, let alone use the bathroom as normally needed. Looking at her, he simply motioned for her to stay at his side as he moved to the wall connecting the front of the bathroom. Uttering the word duck, knowing it would be a partial command she was bound to, then grabbing her and pulling her down on the floor as the wall exploded over them. Particles of wood and building matter flew all around them as he shoved her against the recliner in the corner of the hallway near the bathroom, then stood. The presence of a heavy weight filled the room. Part of it was his, and part of it was the vampire whom he had addressed when he had been in Mrs. Ariana's home. Watching the man, he could tell it had taken a bit to dawn on him he no longer had power over the things that had been the now deceased mistresses. Nicholas's money was on the fact that this man most likely knew what had happened to their mistress, but the question was, if she had not turned him, who had? And if she turned him, why or how could he have survived her demise without truly going feral? No, this was a vampire who had been connected with blood older than the mistresses, but why? Glancing around, it struck him that they made quick work of the wards that should have kept them from tracking the girl. And yet here they were. Not only did this set Nicholas's facial tics off anew, especially when he'd almost finally gotten them under control, but he would be a couple of 10-pound notes but he would bet a couple of 10-pound notes on the Surrey Coven had no clue what was going on. That, or this was a setup. Either way, he would deal with the situation and take it in hand as best he could, and then report back, as they would definitely be needing a new safe house for starters. Locking eyes with the vampire, down their mists, along with what seemed to be at least another 5 or 6 that all felt like they'd been awakened or created by this one before him. Nicholas sighed, face spasming, and he knew he looked like a raving madman, and stood there, offering up one more chance to this rogue vampire and his family. Beckoning them out of the bathroom and into the main sitting room, he moved them to be willing to follow and sit down. Blah, blah, blah. His face a hot mess of muscle spasms, a deranged offsetting to the very calm and almost regal gestures of the man beckoning him into the room as he now sat in. I need you to understand this is trespassing on the Surrey Coven's private property without permission, and all of you will receive harsh punishments for doing such. This includes the fact the repairs will come out of your own pockets, which I assure you will be astronomical. Unless you leave now, then I will simply say it was a plumbing malfunction. As he looked back through the gaping hole in the wall, and he gestured to the now very shattered toilet and the bathroom they'd left in their wake of intended destruction, then gestured back to the chairs. Please, sit. It will go easier if you choose to sit and parley with me over this. If not, he sighed, we will do this your way, and some fates are far worse than death. He watched them look amongst themselves for a moment. It was almost cliché in the motions he understood, as they were waiting for a signal from somewhere, and as much as he wanted to give them that moment, it just wasn't there to give them. Closing his eyes, he let the illusions fill the room, and the skin began to crawl as though covered in bugs. A gift of his own making, something he had learned when he could turn his own muscle spasms against others and evoke hallucinations. This proved well a wall against both humans and new vamps alike. It wasn't a first resort, but it was a non-violent one. As they'd already trashed the bathroom and the entrance out of it, it was time to establish boundaries past the broken ones. As the bugs began to take actual shape, he realized he was invoking the very recently deceased mistress's power as well. The bugs had never taken physical shape. Shaking his head, he could not go back, as the first one had already started to scream and flail from the bugs swarming all over his body. Well, 1 down, 7 more to go. The chaos that followed in those next few minutes were both expected and almost cartoonish in a somewhat horrific fashion, as he watched them being eaten alive in front of him. Sighing heavily, he stood immediately and held out his hand in an almost silent sound wave-like energetic pulse. Another thing now amped up. As this was stressing him out further, his own face was back to the twisted mass of spasms, and anyone taking in his visage would assume he was a maniac man enjoying what he was doing to those in front of him. The pulse did its job, disrupting the first spell and making the bugs disperse and disappear. He would vow to never use that ability as long as he was still acting as master to the deceased mistress's house. The few that were left were not in the best of ways. The one who had led the charge and assaulted on the safe house was in the worst way of all of them. He felt terribly guilty. He had not known what her abilities were, and had space for a moment. He has activated being head of the household. Walking over, now far less cocky vampire he dealt with in the old mistress's household, he kneeled down and cupped his face in an almost sympathetic fashion and calmly said, "This is why I prefer people using the front door. Now, will you parley with me why you're here and have broken several of the laws of the Surrey Coven?" A look of heated defiance filled the other vampire's face before another wave of pain swept over him, and his head fell back in an open silent scream. He was tired of this, and simply wanted answers. Getting up, he scooped up the vampire and took him to the kitchen. Laying him down on the floor, he reopened the box and made more of the mixture of bone and used the man's own blood as it would have been still be the mistress in it. Looking at him in the light of the kitchen, knowing full well sunrise was very soon, he saw how badly the bugs had done their work. His illusions had never taken a life of their own, let alone the lives of others, and he felt in a way that the mistress had reached beyond the grave and was punishing them for acting like this and hurting a favorite of hers. It was not a comforting thought. Busying himself, he made the paste and forced it unceremoniously down the man's throat, and then told him to relax and let the medicine help. As expected, it did heal much of the damage, but not all. He would have many a scar from this encounter, but maybe it would make him wiser in so many ways. Helping him sit up, he half carried him back to the living room. He kind of chuckled to himself of the ironicity of the living room not being full of living people. Okay, we're about to rock chapter 3. How you guys doing? That last chapter was, I always see that one as really intense. How you guys doing? I love the fact you pulled your covers over your head, Mr. IMF. Yeah, now I'm nervous. Waiting. It's like, I'm okay. How are you doing? I'm nervous. I'm nervous. That I always find that I find chapter 3 rough psychologically and rough because it's still rough around the edges. So to me, it's a very dark chapter, or chapter 2. We're 2 chapters in the book. People are already getting eaten by bugs. Yeah, that's how we do this here. Okay, so if you guys are ready, I'll head to chapter 3. Whew. This is me sweating up a storm. Also, I'm wearing my jacket. My Legend of Zelda jacket. I'm loving this. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3. Vegas, except not. Okay. Alistair finally convinced the Mounties for some tea. His brain was still processing the fact that he was in jail. He knew he'd done nothing to deserve such. He even had to admit for being in jail, this place was not at all bad. And when they felt he was calm enough, he found whoever had made this cup of tea had done a great job. The flavor was rich, yet crisp. And he needed to see what type of kettle they had, because, oh my goodness, the whistles almost felt like in reverberations, not squealing, high, but not low. It was just like it worked from the bottom up, swirling through the mouth vent. So being Alistair, he begged and begged to see the kettle, and naturally they thought it was a crazy request and ignored him. Finally, one of the officers asked him why he was so interested, and at that point, Eric, who was still locked up a few cells down from Alistair, said not to encourage Alistair, or they would have a lecture about tea kettles. Hey, Coffee Quills! Thank you! We are in the nanos. The words are flowing. I'm reading something in the process. We decided to kick off Nano early, and I was reading a little bit of something I'm written that's Halloween-esque. Very, very, very Samhain, very, very happy Halloween. So it's got vampires and all sorts of stuff. Welcome. We're glad you are here. But yes, the words are flowing. And so are the retweakings. Yay, we've got more people. Yee! So let's see, where was I? Yes. We are in chapter 3, by the way. It's titled Vegas, except not. Alistair, who was still locked up, or Eric, who was still locked up a few cells down from Alistair, said to not encourage Alistair or they would have a lecture about tea kettles dating all the way back to their origins, and nobody wanted that. Those words blasted Alistair, and he was already done being in the cell and started to rant again, which the poor officer stepped away, shaking his head. I'm waving back with both hands. After that, he left Alice there to calm down and whispered, uh, after he left, Alistair calmed down and whispered, "That was not fair, Eric. Not fair at all." A smile slipped over the raven shifter's face as he stayed resting against the stone wall. "Don't worry, old friend. They don't believe me. I can already hear them getting the kettle and turning around and coming back. Can't say I didn't warn them." At this, Alistair got terribly excited as the same mounted officer returned and the man carefully showed the rather ornate, flourished hammered metal, notably rather tall tea kettle to him, to which Alistair began to flutter and verbally melt all over it, speaking of its seemingly Russian style of design, and that the period was popular and the origins on this for 20 minutes, to which the look on the man's face went from first a stunned silence to straight up tired boredom, to the point he suddenly took the tea kettle and walked away, as Alistair was still talking yet another breath in his taking another breath in his continued lecture. Eric did his best to keep his chuckling as quiet as possible as he continued to sip on his own tea in a relatively peace and well-earned quiet. 4 days earlier. Eric! I have found another perfect addition for a recipe in my little black book of unrequited love and fully satisfying delicacies. Busting into the office of Sweet Tooth Catering, Alistair was all aflutter over some new European confection that he was sure Alistair would not only like but probably want to make. And Alistair's sugarcane supplier had insisted Alistair come up and try it for himself. Alistair, of course, wanted Eric to join him, but the were-raven insisted that there was too much to be done paperwork-wise. Turning, he said, "Alistair, you're forgetting two very important things. One, no one will want to buy a little black book on baked goods and lost love. There's just no market in it. And two, which is more important, there would be a lot less paperwork round here if you'd apply that little black book writing hand as it was to it as well. This is as far as I've observed, believed, and agreed to a business partnership, which means—" Eric looked very pointedly at Alistair in the moment, looking all the hauntingly way a raven shifter looks when the fey glamour had dropped. "Both partners shoulder responsibilities." Alistair was quick to reply as per his norm. "But Eric, balancing the business checkbook really is my side of the business. You are so much better at it. In fact, if anything, I'm the ideas and word of mouth promotions man, and I know my little black book of culinary delights and lost love will sell. I know it because it will be perfect, and because everyone, including you, secretly wants a little black book." Eric was stunned, and the glamour slammed back into place, and he very politely asked him to leave. Then he began to guide him to the door as he said very plainly, "Alistair, I understand. So very completely. You personally do not care for this side of the business, but without it, we have not a very good catering company. And frankly, I tire of your onslaught of continuous excuses. If you wish to write your little black book, then do so. But if it flops, do not come running asking me to have it covered by the company or to bail you out financially. And if you write about the women in your life and put them in that book, understand there will be backlash. Sometimes a person does not wish to be immortalized in literature. I think it would be best to see you on your way and for you to focus on your trip." Turning him around to face him for one moment before briefly escorting him out the door, he said in a very professional-like way, "Alistair, please consider what I said. Sweet Tooth needs you to be both the outgoing, charisma ball you are in the adverting department, but it also needs the Fae whose head is on his shoulders and takes this company the respect and seriousness she deserves. If I were to be plain with you, Sweet Tooth should be your first love, and the one female this never goes wrong with. Alistair looked Eric in plum shock as the last of the words hit him in the face, and then sputtered as he found himself on the other side of the door, as it had just been very quietly closed in his face. When Eric was truly upset, everything he did was done so quietly and in a serious way that Alistair was taken back that his friend was actually upset with him. He had done nothing wrong. In fact, insisted Eric come with him. Turning, he left and chewed his lower lip, now feeling rather conflicted. He knew the book was exactly what Sweet Tooth needed to get on the map. He would make it a thing. Letting the conversation fall away from his mind, Alistair headed to his car and drove to the closest ferry mound. The silky lass was easy on the eyes, and she flirted back. And who was he to turn down fate or a lovely lady's attentions? A little lovely bit of banter with an enchanting female before traveling always put him in the bubbliest of carefree moods. Hearing Alistair head out, Eric let out a long sigh and heavily dropped to the office chair on his side of the office. He hated being the one responsible, being the one to force Alistair to remember to be responsible. And he knew he was. But the business needed Alistair too. He also clearly saw that until Alistair could really care for or wanted to devote time to Sweet Tooth, he would simply continue dashing out half-assed excuses. Leaning forward in the chair, the realization hit him that maybe this would be a good trip for Alistair. What if it did actually give him the time to think about how much he wanted to actually put himself into being a good business partner? This made him feel hopeful and very resolved that he was done hearing the Alistair excuses. He felt guilty about not wishing him a good or even a safe trip. And he knew not being honest with the Dampire Fae would just allow Alistair to be less responsible, and frankly, Sweet Tooth Catering and her clientele couldn't afford things done half-assed. If a person could get ill from not properly prepared food, then a catering business could fall apart from not properly dotting every I and crossing every T. And Alistair, of all beings, had to get that through his thick skull. Standing suddenly, his eyes widened in realization that he should have thought to ask who put the bug in Alistair's ear over this new confection. Looking back at the last hour, he sighed inwardly because he was so upset that Alistair was once again dashing off, not even hiding the fact that he wasn't going to help with the office work. This wasn't the only workload Eric carried. He still had baking and confection making to do for his own bakery that would be time-consuming as well. He really had hoped Alistair would step up, but he was seeing it was not as a reality, sadly, as of yet. Looking at the picture on the wall of the cathedral in New Orleans, sighing as he did so, wished to visit une petite tranche de vie once more. For all those locals had gone through, they still found a way to enjoy their little slice of life. And he just needed Alistair to do more than just swim in his own little slice of life. If he could just be more responsible, Eric felt he himself would breathe a little bit easier and not be so worried about the business end of Sweet Tooth Catering. So darn much. That was jumble. Okay, so now we're at chapter 4. We got just a little bit of a paragraph here. If you guys are ready, I'll read that, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good? By the way, Coffee Quills, I think your name is great. I absolutely think it's absolutely fantastical. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I read this to you guys. Now I'm feeling very nervous. We have quiet. Greetings, programs. I see more people are here. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. We're working a little bit, getting a little bit of a jump on Nanowrimo. I'm reading an an appropriate Halloweenish story. It's got vampires, and it's got ghouls, and it's got fairies. It's got food. It's got murder. It's good stuff. Thank you. I'm gonna attempt to keep putting this last chunk. I haven't heard anything from Mr. Guy MM, so I'm a little worried he might have died somewhere. Don't die, Mr. Guy MM. Or he could have passed out. I mean, who knows? And then I will read the last bit, and then we'll go from there. Chapter 4. Yeah, he could be washing up. That's true. Chapter 4. Surprise, surprise. Ooh, I want dessert. The thing with young ghouls and vampires is they still thought in human reactions. They freaked out when damaged or mangled. Nicholas watched in wonder, because the regeneration process never ceased to amaze him even after all these years. The rebinding of flesh and bone was a melody in organisms that still lived, even on this case, the vampire being healed. Even though it was not going to be perfect, by far, still left him in a state of absolute wonder, as he watched the holes in the jagged edges of skin flatten as they smoothed and grew back together. He was glad that this arrogant POS was mostly not cognitive, given what the bugs had done to him, or he felt this one, for all his arrogance and bravado, might have been a screamer. And if he was just like him, he might have found a way to make him cognitive to feed off his agony and terror. But he wasn't, and this filth sickened him. But being duty-bound to the coven, this was the only recourse, so he tiredly walked this path. When the man finally came to again, Nicholas's face was twitching still, and asked him why he'd set to attack them, and warned the man that to lie would most likely cost him his life. Glancing around at the mangled, lifeless bodies, to make this point even clearer, though Nicholas had no intention of using that ability again until he was very clear and very free of being master. Even though he had no control over his facial tics, they too, in their own unsettling way, encouraged the vampire to talk more than seeing his companions strewn all over. He begged Nicholas not to look at him, and explained he'd been given a phone call with this address and told that under no circumstances was anyone here to survive. Grumpy and well past done, the ghoul told him he'd pretty much succeeded. It was a real shame. It was all his men that got taken out. He let that sit, and demanded the number, to which he was informed the number came through as unavailable. Nicholas grumbled loudly, because now it would be 2 he'd be taking into the coven. He really needed to go back to his normal routine of boring with no excitement. And we're done. That is the end of what I've got up to this point. So, that was my little Halloween story for tonight. And this is what I'm getting stuff done on. And yeah, so I'm hoping that it sounded okay. I know it's chunky all over. That's why I often go back and edit the chapters. But yeah, this is chapter 2, or this is book 2 in the Sweet Tooth Catering series. This is called Last Bites. And it is set in Surrey, Canada. And it revolves around our boys and the vampire coven in, of course, Surrey, Canada. So yeah. And who is out to get the vampires? Bum ba bum bum bum. As all murder mysteries go, we will find out. But yeah, so yeah, and then on Wednesdays I do a writing Wednesday, and during that my goal is to actually bring in 10-minute word sprints. So those always make my day, because I love words. I love 10-minute sprints, because you can sit down and you can just write whatever. And because we're in Nanowrimo, yes, that means we will really be able to kind of just just relax and just get into the writing flow. So I'm really excited. But yes, I'm hoping to complete this one for Nanowrimo. This is my goal. This is going to be my 50,000 word baby, because I'm like that. If not, that's okay. I intend to complete this book, and then I'll go back and finish up Sweet Tooth. Because Sweet Tooth's at 20,000. But yeah. So yeah. So you guys thought it was okay? You like it? Yeah. You were traumatized by it? It's okay if you were traumatized by it, you know. Um, I have I have friends that live in Canada, and I make a point of talking to them because I don't want to put something in a book that's inaccurate. So I talk to them about things like. But I would. Well, yes, you did under your blankies. You did hide under your blankies. You did. It's a scary story, huh? It's scary. Um, I visualize these things, so for me it's scary because I'm reliving it. You know that when in chapter 2, she he's he's thinking through the fact that she is living her memories, right? For me as a writer, I live the moments. They play out in my mind. So as they're pouring out, I'm there in them happening. And it's cool. But it also can be very intimidating or scary when you're going back to read it again and you're just like, "Oh, that's right. I remember this happening. I was there." But you're not there, but you're there. So, yeah, I'm weird like that as a writer. Um I'm really excited about this one. The last one, I didn't get to play around with. I got to play around with supernatural things, but I wanted to kind of do it a different way. So this one, I decided to go with quote the traditional trope, but with the vampires, I really wanted something that explained the dust and what could be done with the dust. I actually looked up a type of vampiric dust because I was trying to see what was already out there because I didn't want to plagiarize anything. But oftentimes, again, it's copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. Original ideas are rare. So I'm excited about this one. I feel Nicholas especially has a very solid. He's established in who he is as a character. I look forward to fleshing out Elizabeth a bit more, and she's actually based on a friend of mine that you guys know. And okay, I'll tell you, it's Rissa. Elizabeth is based on Rissa. So when I think of her and the descriptions of the physical descriptions of Elizabeth, Mistress Aries' favorite, she's Rissa. Her sweetness, her kindness, her shyness, her helpfulness. Um, Nicholas is a combination of two of my friends, of my friend Howitzer, who also lives in Canada, and my roommate Ganondorf. And the original concept design for Nicholas actually came from Dorf, because he was constantly harassing me about the fact that I should put him in one of my books, right? I was like, okay, you want to be immortalized forever. We can arrange this, my friend. Um, so when we started talking about, I was talking to him about stuff that I was trying to do for Last Bites and Sweet Tooth, and he was like, "Well, you should have, they should have like a ghoul groupie." I was like, I could do something with this. I could do something with this because Sweet Tooth didn't have any ghouls in it, whereas A Last Bites has a very defined area for ghouls. Nicholas is a ghoul. He's an old ghoul. And then you get to meet other ghouls. You get to, because you gotta have somebody to do the vampire's biddings while everybody's sleeping. Um, so And then I have several other friends who live in Canada. That again, I do a lot of research. I will be like, hey, I'm doing this today. What's this called? Where's this at? How close is this to here? Is this okay for me to say this? Is this okay for me to do this? What do I call this? That's why the running joke is that Alistair was calling them bobbies, not mounties, because he assumed that they were English, so that so that in that sense they were bobbies because obviously they're English policemen, um, whereas they're not. They're mounties. So I wanted to have little faux pas and running jokes through because Alistair he's he's Face from, if you've ever seen the A-Team, he's very much Face. He's got a line every minute. He thinks he's the most charming guy out there. And he's not actually being arrogant about it. He just genuinely thinks he is. He's got a bubbly personality because of the Fey blood. And he's always got some shenanigans. And that's Alistair, at least to me. So for him, I wanted him to be naive, but not genuinely clueless. But like to immediately assume one thing and then it have to be explained to him that it's another thing. And it for him to take a bit to process that thought because he'd already stapled into his mind how this was. And I want that for him because I want my characters to have flaws. Because flaws make them more relatable. And I prefer characters with flaws because I have flaws. So again, you write what you know. Um, but yeah, wow. Okay, I'm good now. So we've actually been live streaming for a bit, and I really appreciate you guys being here. Um, and I've actually got a soundtrack for this. Um, and it's really short because the story is in process, so I haven't really gotten more music that inspired me to it. But I'm really excited and honored that I got to share. Yep. So I write. I I I do soundtracks for my books, and I make their covers. So Last Bites has on the cover. It's of I wanted to have like someone biting a cherry, but it's obviously a vampire. So it will be Last Bites, and then it will have the T being the T for and B for bites coming down like fangs because Sweet Tooth has the fang theme as well for the how the font is done on it. So Last Bites has somebody biting into a cherry and a vampire biting into the cherry, and then above it is Last Bites. Mainly because I haven't figured out something better for that. Sweet Tooth, however, was easy. With Sweet Tooth, I had the fang themes for Sweet Tooth, um, and then for the fangs coming down on either side, and then underneath that was a hand that was obviously somebody had fallen on a carpet. They were dead, and a broken one of those confection kind of tube swirls, the chocolate confectionaries that had broken in their hands, broken on the floor. So yeah, but yeah, no, I'll have to share you guys with my soundtracks definitely. But yeah, no, the soundtracks help me get into a good mindset of how I want my my OCs, my characters, to feel, or how they feel, so I can feel it, so I can let the sequences kind of pour out as they will. Nicholas is very much The Sound of Silence is his song, and he gets really, because of the face twitches, he looks like he's crazy, but he's so controlled. Everything about him is so controlled. He doesn't like anything to be crazy, out of place, or not happening in the right order. He's very OCD about that. Um, but yeah, when I first started writing Sweet Tooth, um, I really wanted to do something in New Orleans because it's kind of a hub all into itself of supernatural stuff. But I didn't want to do mainstream. So when I started writing it, I thought, what is better for New Orleans than a couple of fairies like Faye? Because actually, Alistair and Eric, well, nobody really knows what Eric's purposes are outside of baking, which he's very good at. Um, Alistair, however, is all about the ladies. But a couple of fairies going to New Orleans to deal with things, and actually being able to refer to Sweet Tooth, to that actual book in this one, I I didn't realize how much I needed to do that and how much I was glad I could do that, because the place that the picture is taken of, that Eric looks at on the wall, actually a lot of bad things happened at that local little restaurant in Sweet Tooth, and that was part of the big investigation that they ended up doing. So yeah, there's a lot. Um, I also like being able to play on words. So with Sweet Tooth, because it's the first one, there's a lot of play on words, like the realtor company that hires them to come to New Orleans um, is called Our Home or Yours Realty, and the owner of it is Miss Miss E. Yeah, Miss Missy. So, um, but yeah, I there's a lot. There's a lot. I'm constantly working with wordplay. I'm constantly working with formulating how I want things to feel, how to flow, and I oftentimes just let my characters tell me what's going on. Not always the best, but not always the worst. Um, like the whole situation with the bugs and the vampires, I have no clue where that came from. I got in the zone, and me and Nicholas were in the zone, and we were listening to the sound of silence and monster, and I just typing like a crazy man. Um, but I was proud of it when it got done, because it allowed me to go, oh, well, you can write some darker stuff, and it's not a scary thing, you know? And I felt, hey, Snow, good to see you. My heart's to you. All of them. My heart meter is all yours. It's all filled up, ready for you. Yay! Yeah! Nanowrimo, peeps! We doing the thing. November's in the house. Wanted to start it early, but it's one of those things that, again, that Sweet Tooth and Last Bites are a challenge for me, because it's not my mainstream of what I write. I write high fantasy. Sweet Tooth allows me to write fantasy, but it's not like high fantasy in the sense of this is happening in like our world, human domain, and it's happening with real things, day to day sort of life, and how these guys are coping. I was told that when I was working on Sweet Tooth that it was considered a slice of life foodie murder mystery. And I thought, yes, that is exactly what I'm writing. I'm writing a series of slice of life foodie murder mysteries. I'm okay with that. Um, but it's a genre I haven't been in before. Um, so I'm always worried that I'm going to do something wrong. But I think that's the way a lot of writers think, that they feel like it's going to go wrong. So, right? A slice of life foodie murder mystery. I thought it was great. It's a supernatural slice of life fruity murder mystery. That's right. That's right. So, um, but I was worried about chapter 3 because I felt that Eric was sounding like he was waxing long in his soliloquies, but I think reading it back again, it's just the right amount. Because the whole point of that chapter was for people to understand that Eric has some serious concerns, and Alistair has no concerns at all, and that this is affecting their business. And if Sweet Tooth is affected, then the catering company goes under. And to me, that is a reality of life. If you're a business partner with somebody and they can't give their 200%, it affects the business. So again, I guess in my own way, I try to write what I know in a very solid fashion. So maybe chapter 3 in my way was me being very serious about the fact that if I'm in a business with somebody, they got to give me their 200%, or I'm gonna ask them to leave and shut the door quietly in their face. That's how this works. Um, but yeah, so for Nanowrimo, I'm gonna continue this bad boy, and Last Bites is gonna get 50,000 words. It's gonna be polished, and I am going to make it a book. It's gonna be a thing, and I'm looking forward to getting this one right out of the bucket. And even if I have to say, no, this is book 2 in the series. Book 1's not done. I won't feel bad. I won't feel bad because I feel like even my writing has come to a better place since I started Sweet Tooth several years ago. So, absolutely, guys. Absolutely. I will. I won't. I can't promise hard copies because who knows if they'll buy them, but I will totally give you all PDFs. And I will be looking for beta readers. So beta readers are, in my mind, they are gold. They are most precious species of being. And as a beta reader, I am honored when I can showcase my things to other people and they can beta read in return. So yeah. Likes me some beta readers, guys. So yeah, let me get this bad boy chunky. But now we all know what I'll be doing on our Writing Wednesdays. And then I will still happily read anything you guys want to send me through Discord, or send me via Instagram, or send me via Facebook. Because I don't know how you send people stuff here on Twitch. But any of those places, if you guys are friends with me there, hook me up. Say, hey, Laws, can you read this for me? And then I'll be like, yes, I will totally put you into the Writing Wednesday and I will read this for you. So, as long as it's PG. And I think overall this story is PG. I don't think it's quite PG-13. But it is PG. It is dark. And it will probably be just as dark all the way through until things get settled. It's going to take a bit. But yeah. So, I don't know. My brain is rambling. I'm really glad I got to share this with you guys. I'm really glad that I'm going to be able to do more on this. And I'm excited about this. Really, I am. So, I think with that though, because we've been live streaming for 2 hours, I think I'm going to call it. And I'm going to wish those of you who are, oh, yep, see, I'm a big reading and proofreader too, so no? Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Got a proof. I'm going to go ahead and wish people a happy All Saints Day. And that I hope your holidays were blessed. And I'm really glad you guys were here. I'm confused, Solus. What is the little eye thingy above your eye thingy? Definitely snow. Definitely. Definitely. You are. I'm gonna make sure to write that down in my notes on my thing that you asked to be counted in as a reader. Cool. But yes. Um. So I'm gonna go ahead and head out. I love you all. I appreciate you being my community. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the support, and I appreciate you guys talking to me. But take care, and I will see you on the next live stream.